I was halfway through my water when Victoria said, "Another table. You're not real family." Laughter clinked like glassware cutting skin. The waiter slid a folder toward me. 3500 stared back, cold and bright. I signed without blinking. My hand shook, my voice didn't. "I'm Julia Thornton. I grew up under the Hayes roof, but never inside their circle. I learned to swallow salt and smile like it didn't burn. Tonight, the burn tasted different. Clean, electric. Across the room, they toasted themselves. Harold told a story. Margaret corrected the punchline. Charles bragged about returns. Victoria watched me, smiling like a judge. I stood, heels counting the distance. I sat alone, near the bar's dim mercy. Silence finally had a witness, me. Before I continue, subscribe and tell me your city. Because this isn't a pity story. It's a reckoning. That night, I stopped being their charity case. I became their consequence. I didn't learn hunger from empty plates. I learned it from empty faces. From being present, yet not included. From standing in photos, cropped later. On Charles's 16th birthday, a car gleamed. Neighbors gathered, cameras flashed, champagne hissed. I walked past in shoes that drank rain. Mine squeaked apologies down the driveway. Victoria unboxed dresses wrapped in tissue. Silk sighed like something alive and chosen. My clothes arrived pre-creased, pre-owned, pre-approved. Closet air smelled like mildew and memory. When I asked about college, silence answered first. Then came the script I knew by heart. Be grateful you even have a roof. Gratitude to them meant permanent compliance. At dinner, I learned table geography. The loud center for the rightful heirs, the edge seats for servants and standbys. I was always near the edge. Harold perfected his benevolent patriarch voice. Margaret handled refinements, rules, reputations again. Victoria sharpened ridicule into something elegant. Charles kept score like a banker. I practiced invisibility until it fit. I could disappear without leaving the room. Teachers said I was resilient and stoic. They never saw the invoice for stoicism. Only Eleanor looked long enough to see. She arrived at my graduation alone, unannounced. She pressed a book into my hands. Her voice cut clean through the noise. You don't need anyone to grant you worth. You'll build it yourself, Julia. That sentence followed me like a lantern. It kept burning when doors shut loudly. It warmed me when winter sat indoors. It stayed lit when microphones lied. The Hayes taught me curated generosity. Gifts with strings, kindness with receipts attached. They fed me, then itemized the portions. They housed me, then taxed my breathing. So I learned another language entirely. The language of keeping ledgers no one sees. Of counting slights, then counting strengths. Of saving evidence and saving myself. Only one woman saw it all. And one signature would change everything. The room went weightless when Eleanor stood. Her cane touched marble like a gavel. I signed a new will yesterday. Everything I own belongs to Julia. Silence swallowed the chandelier's whole. Glasses trembled. A laugh died mid-flight. Harold blinked as if mishearing. Margaret twisted her napkin into rope. Charles recalculated behind his eyes, fast. Victoria smiled without moving her mouth. I didn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The waiter kept breathing for me. He cleared plates like clearing histories. Eleanor rested a hand on mine. Eat, she murmured. You'll need strength. Everyone else tasted metal and dust. By morning, the city had opinions. Headlines didn't need the whole story. Adopted interloper steals Hayes' fortune. Caretaker manipulates a fragile matriarch. Comment sections opened their sharpened mouths. Strangers stapled labels to my name. Photos of me buying milk circulated. Someone circled the milk like evidence. Charles hired a private investigator immediately. Footsteps shadowed me from curb to elevator. A car idled outside my building nightly. Blinds became borders I patrolled hourly. My phone learned new ways to ring. Unknown numbers practiced intimate cruelty. Walk away, Julia, before you're exposed. Exposed for breathing? For existing? For staying? Victoria chose television over text, under studio lights. Outrage photographs beautifully. She preyed on Eleanor's loneliness, she said. She has always wanted what's ours. The audience hummed with righteous certainty. The host pressed sympathy like a stamp. I watched from my couch, small. I watched, then pressed mute. Eleanor called at dawn, voice gravel soft. Don't let them write your life. Come to the house this afternoon. Her study smelled like paper and rain. Folders lay open like clean wounds. Bank statements. Dated transfers. Authorizations. Numbers that told a different biography. Money set aside after my parents died. Money bled into tuitions and renovations. 600,000 became someone else's childhood. Caldwell, Eleanor's lawyer, spoke without embroidery. They'll manufacture noise. We'll answer with facts. We build a timeline, then a narrative. Truth needs a route to travel. We listed every receipt in silence. We underlined the dates that shattered myths. We flagged the voices that contradicted themselves. At night, I practiced steady breathing. In the mirror, I practiced steady eyes. I wrote my name on sticky notes. I stuck them where panic lived. Door frame, kettle, remote, front pocket. I turned off notifications and turned inward. I archived rumors and kept records. I learned how quiet can sharpen steel. Eleanor's health dipped, then steadied. Her resolve never needed medicine. We go public, she said simply. A press conference, documents, doctors, witnesses. Let the light do its work. I nodded and my fear nodded back. We were done whispering into pillows. We were ready to speak where echoes multiply. But the truth Eleanor showed me would turn their lies to ash. Rain needled the morning like a warning. Caldwell set documents in careful constellations. Dates aligned. Transfers aligned. Motives aligned. Eleanor watched, pale but steady. Stage 4, she told me quietly. Time is short. Truth can't be. Her breath thinned. Her will didn't. Today we end the pretending. The press room thrummed like a hive. Cameras blinked, impatient for headlines. Microphones leaned, hungry for casualties. I sat beside Eleanor, spine locked. Caldwell began with a map of money. He walked the room across years, ledger by ledger, transfer by transfer. Numbers testified without trembling. Funds reserved after the Thorntons' accident, he said. For Julia's care, education, future. He turned the page without dramatics. Diverted to Hayes expenses for decades. Boarding school tuition for Charles, highlighted. Renovations for Hayes properties, highlighted. European travel for Victoria, highlighted. A family bill written in my blood. Medical evaluations came next. Quiet weapons. Eleanor competent when signing the will. Cognition tested, documented, witnessed, countersigned. No fog to hide behind. A hand lifted, voice barbed. Ms. Thornton, did you influence Mrs. Hayes? Words that once made me smaller. I looked straight into the lens. I influence nothing except survival. My existence is not coercion. My silence was. Pens paused. Cameras adjusted and held. The back doors crashed open. Victoria arrived. Mascara like war paint. She manipulated an old woman, she cried. She's always wanted what's ours. Microphones swarmed her outrage instantly. The room feasted on performance. I watched the floor's black tile. It reflected us smaller, but truer. Eleanor never rose to chaos. She let it expose itself. When the noise sagged, she murmured, "See, they undo themselves." Caldwell raised one last folder. Affidavits. Bank confirmations. Attorney letters. An arrow through 30 years' fog. Even the cameras seemed to exhale. Outside, the city argued with itself. Gold digger or rightful heir. Threats slid into my voicemail. Walk away before we open everything. But everything was already open. Noise had fewer places left. I slept on Eleanor's couch. She woke at 2, asked tea. I wish I'd done this earlier, she whispered. But I'll die without lying. She squeezed my hand, papery warm. You will live without permission. Morning brought a cease and desist letter. It read like theater, not law. Caldwell smiled without showing teeth. Good, they're on our stage. We filed the pleadings by noon. Relief felt like a tender bruise. Painful, yet proof of healing begun. Outside, the rain finally unclenched. I stood at the window, counting breaths. Portland steamed under a thinning sky. For the first time, I felt taller. Not bigger, just my full height. We left whispers behind for sunlight. We replaced rumor with receipts. We turned fear into forward motion. Now the truth finally had a road. They called me a thief. Tomorrow, the receipts would name the thieves. The courthouse shone like polished bone. Inside, the air weighed heavy. I wheeled Eleanor to council table. Caldwell stacked binders like quiet fortresses. Across the aisle sat the Hayes. Harold smoothed a cuff, already judging. Margaret clutched pearls into a rosary. Charles watched me, calculating exits. Victoria stared straight ahead, jaw armored. Their attorney rose first, silk smooth. He shaped his voice into a scalpel. Ms. Thornton manipulated an elderly widow, he began. Isolation, dependency, sudden change of testament. He walked the jury through insinuations. No facts, just shadows dressed as evidence. Caldwell didn't perform, he began. Bank statements projected onto the wall. Transfers from the Thornton Fund documented. School tuition for Charles. Notarized authorization. Renovation invoices, debits, corresponding dates. 30 years arranged in rows of ink. Money set aside after the accident, he said. for Julia's care and education. Diverted repeatedly to Hayes' expenses. Not gifts, not loans, misappropriation. He called the neurologist next. Crisp testimony about competency and cognition. Eleanor had scored well above thresholds. 2 assessments. 2 dates. 2 witnesses. No fog, no confusion, no coercion. Then the videos came in. The press conference played for the court. Victoria lunged across the screen, shouting, "She's always wanted what's ours. We deserve that money. We raised her." The room didn't move for seconds. Even paper forgot how to rustle. I heard my heart steady, unbelievable. It stayed steady when the clip ended. Caldwell rested a hand on the lectern. "No further questions for that witness," he said. It was my turn to stand. I told the truth without embroidery. The car in the driveway. The dresses wrapped in tissue. The mildew closets. The rain-drinking shoes. The be grateful that replaced permission. How silence became my second language. "I didn't want their money," I said. "I wanted what was meant for me. Dignity. A fair chance. My own name. My existence is not theft. The theft is already in evidence." Their attorney tried one last flourish. "Isn't losing them worth avoiding this spectacle?" "I lost them years ago," I answered. "Today is about not losing myself." Judge Morrison leaned forward, face unwavering. "Having reviewed testimony and documentary evidence," she said, "the court finds the will valid. The estate is awarded to Julia Thornton. Harold and Margaret Hayes will repay misappropriated funds. With interest, the amount totals $1.8 million. This case is closed." Her gavel sounded like weather breaking. Harold collapsed into his chair. Margaret folded inward, pearls rattling softly. Charles stared at numbers he couldn't finesse. Victoria erupted, voice shredding into echoes. The doors devoured her protests whole. I sat and exhaled for years. Eleanor squeezed my fingers, paper strong. "You stood up," she whispered. "You stayed standing." The corridor smelled like varnish and freedom. Outside, light pooled on the steps. I felt taller without moving an inch. Finally, my full height. That day, justice didn't whisper. It roared my name. Eleanor slept more, then deeper. Lavender clung to the curtains like prayer. I read to her softly at dusk. We underlined sentences about chosen family. She smiled without opening her eyes. One night, she did not wake. Her hand cooled in mine, unafraid. Grief moved through me like weather. It did not drown me this time. It washed what needed washing. The papers called me an heir. I corrected them quietly in practice. I wasn't an heir, I was persistent. Persistence had finally outlived their performance. Weeks blurred into signatures and audits. Locks changed. Accounts reconciled. Ledgers closed. The city learned a new headline for me. Not burden, not opportunist, not guest. A woman with a name that stayed. I opened the Eleanor Foundation in spring. Glass, light, and rooms that listened. Kids arrived with eyes that checked exits. We taught them how to stay. We taught them how to leave. We taught them both our victories. Letters found me from everywhere. Foster kids. Adoptees. The quietly estranged. They wrote about shame losing altitude. They wrote about dignity landing safely. I kept every letter in boxes labeled. Proof that silence breaks. Harold and Margaret sold the big house. Charles discovered numbers that refused obedience. Victoria sent an email threaded with apologies. I deleted it before it opened. Closure doesn't always need correspondence. I visited the lake house alone. Wind combed the firs into chorus. On the study desk, her pen waited. I signed nothing. I needed nothing signed. I left a note anyway. Thank you for telling the truth aloud. Walking out, I felt my spine lengthen. Not taller, just undisguised finally. My life no longer needed permission. It needed practice, then joy. If you've been through this, you're not alone. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading. The sweetest revenge isn't ruining them. It's building the life they forbade, and living it, daily, in plain sight.
The last time I stood in my parents' house, it still smelled like lemon polish and old furnace air. Mom used to wipe down the baseboards every Saturday, no matter how brittle her hands had become. She said dust made a house look unloved. She'd been gone 4 days. Her funeral was small, just close family, and one neighbor who brought over a lemon pound cake no one touched. I stayed at a local inn 2 miles from the house I grew up in. I hadn't asked to stay with my family. I hadn't been invited. That morning, I came by to help sort through Mom's things. My father, Frank Whitmore, was seated in his usual recliner, reading a flyer for window replacements he'd never buy. He nodded at me but didn't speak. My sister Janet Lee, now since marrying Doug, was already in Mom's bedroom, arms elbow deep in drawers. She had a blue purse, Janet said without turning. You know the one. She always kept it under the dresser. It's gone. I didn't answer. I remembered that purse. Navy leather, soft with age. Mom used to clutch it close like it held something irreplaceable, though she never said what was inside. Frank spoke next without looking up. You had the key to the back door last month, when you came to take her to the eye doctor. I gave it back before I left, I said quietly. Janet straightened face unreadable. She trusted you with it, that's fine. But we're just saying, if you came by after the funeral home took her and something happened to it, it's okay to say so now. I looked from her to Dad. He closed the pamphlet. I'm not accusing, he said, his voice flat. But she kept some of her jewelry in there. Sentimental things. She didn't wear much near the end, but she told your sister she put them away for safekeeping. Something in me pulled taut. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Janet folded her arms. I mean, it's just us. No police. We just want it back. There was silence. The kind that thickens in old houses where nothing moves unless someone forces it. I didn't take it, I said. Frank nodded slowly as if I'd confirmed what he feared. Or what he expected. Well, he said, clearing his throat. If it turns up, just bring it back. And maybe take a break from coming around, Janet added, her voice tighter. We all need space. I looked at them both, two people who shared my blood but not my doubt. The blue purse wasn't the only thing that had disappeared from that house. I left without another word. The next morning I returned to the house. I didn't want to, but I had to. I'd promised Mom I would help sort the photo boxes, the ones she kept labeled by year even as her memory began fraying at the edges. Frank was already at the kitchen table when I walked in, sipping coffee from a chipped mug with the Cincinnati Reds logo. His robe was open over a flannel shirt, mismatched socks on his feet. Sit, he said without looking up. I did. Janet came in a few minutes later carrying a yellow notepad and a Ziploc bag of receipts. She didn't greet me, just pulled out the chair across from mine and set her things down like she was preparing for a deposition. Frank cleared his throat. We talked last night. Your sister's been doing some checking. Janet nodded. Mom told me a few weeks before she passed that she was putting her valuables in the blue purse. She even mentioned some savings bonds. I blinked. Savings bonds. She didn't want them lying around, Janet went on. She said she felt safer keeping everything together, and the last person she saw alone was you. Frank folded his hands. We're not trying to make this ugly, but there's no sign of forced entry. No one else had the key. The house was locked. I said nothing. It wouldn't matter. Janet leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. This isn't just about a purse. It's about trust. You weren't here when Mom's hip broke. You weren't here when she couldn't remember how to dial 911. I was. I sent money, I said. Money doesn't sit by someone's bedside at 3 a.m. when they don't know where they are. Frank raised a hand. Let's stay on topic. I am, Janet replied, eyes still on me. You weren't here. But now that Mom's gone here, you are showing up just in time to sort through her things. She let that sentence hang, like it was the conclusion I should have drawn for myself. My hands were still on the table, palms down. I could feel the wood grain pressing faintly into my skin. I don't want her arrested, Janet said, turning to Frank. But if she has the purse, we deserve to know. I looked at my father. His gaze met mine, but it didn't soften. We're not filing anything legal, but I agree. Bring it back if you took it. And it's probably best you leave afterward. It landed quiet. Not cruel, not loud. Just final. I pushed back my chair and stood. You think I stole from her? You're the only one who had access, Janet said. What else are we supposed to think? I opened my mouth, closed it, then nodded. All right. Janet blinked. So I don't have it, I said. She frowned. Then why I said I don't have it, I repeated. But I understand what you've decided. I turned toward the hallway, toward the front door I used to race through after school. Janet's voice followed me. We don't want drama, Sally. We just want the truth. I paused at the coat rack. That's what I want too, I said. I'm sorry you don't recognize it. I didn't cry on the drive back to the motel. I kept the radio off and my eyes on the road like that could keep the rest of me from unraveling. The room was cold. The wall heater made more noise than heat. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. For a while, I just stared at the floral comforter. It looked like something my mother would have picked out 20 years ago. I opened my suitcase, unzipped the inner pocket, and pulled out a small padded envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a faded receipt from Best Buy. The date was 7 weeks ago. Underneath it was a folded note in my mother's handwriting, slanted careful, a little shaky near the end. In case I forget where I put things again. Thank you for helping me feel safe. Mom. She hadn't wanted to install a camera at first, said it felt like spying, but the day I found her looking for her wedding ring in the freezer, she changed her mind. I'm starting to misplace things she told me that afternoon. Or maybe someone else is moving them. I don't know anymore. But I want to know. I need to. So I bought a small indoor cam no bigger than a salt shaker. I set it on the top shelf of her bedroom hutch, angled toward the vanity and dresser. It blended in with her porcelain knickknacks. She smiled when I showed her the app, just in case she'd said. Now, in that motel room with the low humming heater, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and opened the footage folder. Each file was time-stamped. I scrolled to the day after Mom passed, the day Janet said she came by just to sit in Mom's room one last time. I clicked. There she was, Janet. Dressed in a gray sweater, her hair pulled back, moving quickly like she had a list in her head. She opened drawers, pulled open the bottom dresser cabinet, paused. Then she lifted the blue purse. She didn't hesitate, just unzipped it, glanced inside, and tucked it into the large tote bag on her shoulder. A few seconds later, Frank appeared in the doorway. He stopped, looked at Janet, looked at the bag. He said nothing, didn't step forward, just watched for a second, then walked away. I watched the clip twice, and then I sat there, laptop warm on my legs, my mother's note still resting beside me. They hadn't just accused me. They had known exactly who took it. The next day, I didn't knock. The front door creaked the way it always had. The smell of brewed coffee and old carpet hit me like a childhood memory I never asked for. Frank was in his recliner again, a different mug in hand. This one said, Number 1. Grandpa, though he never used the title out loud. Janet was standing by the dining table, sorting envelopes into piles. She looked up. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. I walked in quietly, holding the laptop under one arm, a black cord trailing from my pocket like a thin leash. Frank lowered his cup. You're back. I won't stay long, I said. I set the laptop down on the dining table, same one where we used to carve pumpkins as kids, same one where Mom once burned a hole in the tablecloth with a candle, but pretended it had always been there. Janet crossed her arms. You came to confess. I opened the laptop. The screen blinked to life. No, I said. I came to show you something. I clicked the file, maximized the video, and stepped back. No introductions, no narration. Janet's voice cracked first. What is this? Frank leaned forward. The glow of the screen lit the deep lines under his eyes. He squinted, then stiffened. There it was. In crisp, silent grayscale. Janet entering the bedroom, opening drawers, finding the purse. Taking it. Then Frank appearing, pausing, watching, and walking away. The video ended. The screen went black. The room didn't. Janet's arms dropped to her sides. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She looked at Frank, then at me. She said I could have it, Janet said at last. Her voice was unsteady, like she couldn't decide whether to cry or explain. Back in the spring, when I took her to the doctor, she said, she didn't want you to have it. Frank didn't move. His face was unreadable. Janet took a breath. I didn't steal it. I assumed Mom told you. I stared at her. She didn't. Frank spoke then, low and slow. You had no right to film us. I turned to him. She asked me to. His brow furrowed. She said she was starting to forget things. She wanted help remembering. She didn't want anyone, including herself, to misplace something and not know what happened. That camera was for her peace of mind. Janet shook her head. You waited to show this. You let us walk right into it." "No," I said. "You ran into it. I just pressed play." She flinched like the words landed too close. Frank set his mug down carefully. "What do you want, Sally? You got your little reveal." "So what, now?" I looked at him, then at her. "Nothing," I said. "I'm not here to get even." Janet exhaled a bitter laugh. "Then why come at all?" "Because you accused me. Because you made me stand in the house where I grew up and call me a thief in front of the man who taught me to respect people's things. Because you wanted the truth until it wasn't convenient." I closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut was louder than I expected. Frank leaned back. "Well, I guess it's all out now." I slid the laptop back into its sleeve. "No, not all of it." Janet narrowed her eyes. "What else is there?" I met her stare. "I'm not the one who should be asking that." Then I turned, walked toward the door, and left them in the silence they'd built together. 2 days passed. I didn't hear from either of them. I stayed in the motel, packed but unmoved. The suitcase sat zipped at the foot of the bed. I hadn't booked my flight yet. Not because I was waiting, but because I was finally in no hurry to go where no one expected me. On the 3rd morning, I walked to the post office and mailed a small padded envelope. No return address, just 2 names typed in stiff font on the label, Janet Lee Frank Whitmore, inside. I placed 3 things. First, a copy of Mom's note, the one she wrote in crooked cursive asking for the camera. Second, a photo I'd printed at the drugstore across from the motel, an image pulled from the video, frozen on the moment Janet held the purse open and looked inside. And third, a small handwritten line in my own hand. This was never about the purse. I kept the original note to myself, because it wasn't just a request for help, it was trust given quietly, the kind that didn't need an audience. In the last weeks of her life, Mom didn't write many things down, but one morning before I left town, she'd handed me that folded scrap and said, "Keep this just in case someone ever doubts you were here for me." I had almost forgotten it was in my wallet. Later that evening, I checked my email. A single message waited from Janet. No subject line, just a sentence, short and sour. "You win. Enjoy what's left." There was no follow-up, no apology, no denial, and no response from Frank. Not even silence with weight, just absence flat and familiar. I didn't reply. Some things don't deserve an answer. 6 months later, I flew back to Ohio. Just for a day. The cemetery sat on a small hill above the main road where traffic sounded like wind passing through trees. I hadn't been back since the funeral. No one met me there. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. The grass had grown in around the new headstone. Margaret Maggie Whitmore, beloved mother. Quiet strength. 1941, 2023. I knelt beside her grave and placed a small bouquet of yellow freesia on the stone. Mom never liked roses, said they came with too much performance. From my coat pocket, I pulled out the flash drive. I'd wrapped it in soft cloth the way she used to wrap the Christmas ornaments that meant something. I set it gently at the base of the headstone. No box, no note. Just the thing itself, quiet, still containing everything they didn't want to see. "You were right to be afraid," I said aloud. My voice didn't carry. It didn't need to. A few rows away, the plot next to hers was already marked. Reserved Frank Whitmore. The space was there, etched in stone, waiting for someone who'd never looked back once. I stood for a while, not in grief, but in gravity. There was nothing to forgive, and no one left to ask for it. When I turned to leave, the sun was just starting to sink behind the row of pine trees at the edge of the cemetery. I didn't stop by the house. I didn't need to. Back home in Arizona, I opened the laptop one last time, not out of anger, not even out of sadness, just a kind of unfinished ache that needed closing like a drawer left open too long. The file folder was still there. I clicked through the recordings until I found a clip I hadn't watched before, dated 3 days before Mom died. The camera caught her at her vanity. Morning light from the window. She was brushing her hair, slow, rhythmic, like the motion itself helped her remember who she was. She didn't know the camera was recording audio that day, but then she looked toward it. Not directly at it, but near enough. And softly, like she was speaking to someone invisible, she said, "Sally, I hope this camera makes you feel better too. I'm sorry your sister makes you feel small. You were always the one who saw me." She kept brushing as if nothing had happened. I sat still for a long time. Then I closed the laptop. Carefully this time. I didn't press play to prove a point. I pressed it to survive. Sometimes it's not the accusation that hurts most. It's realizing how quickly the people who raised you can believe it. They don't ask what happened. They don't remember what you've done. They just look at you like a stranger who walked in too quietly. And even when the truth shows up undeniable, time-stamped silent as a video, still they don't apologize. They just look away. Not because they didn't know, but because deep down they did. Maybe that's what survival looks like for some of us. Not justice, not reunion. Just finally seeing it clearly and choosing not to stay in the room when the silence starts. I don't know if you've ever been called a thief in your own home. I don't know if you've ever held a letter that proved someone once trusted you more than they could say out loud. But if you have, if you've ever left quietly and knew that was the real ending, just leave a dot. That's all. Just a single period. I'll know what it means. They came home smiling. Frank Morgan still had his airport neck pillow slung over one shoulder like a badge of comfort. Susan, his wife, carried 3 duty-free shopping bags and wore that heavy European perfume she always saved for special trips. They stood in front of the door of 1842 Sycamore Lane, what they still called our home, and waited for the deadbolt to click. It didn't. Frank jiggled the handle. Did Claire change the lock again? Susan frowned. Don't be ridiculous. Why would she? Then she tried her own key. Nothing. Frank grunted. Well, that's just great. Still standing on the porch with luggage at their feet, they peered through the window beside the front door. No furniture, no curtains, no familiar clutter of books or jackets, or Susan's porcelain angels on the mantel. The house wasn't messy. It was empty. And on the granite kitchen counter, just visible from where they stood, sat a single white sheet of paper. They didn't know it yet, but it read, "Surprise." A burden did this. My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 29 years old. I'm a licensed real estate agent in Columbus, Ohio. I'm someone who pays her bills on time, doesn't raise her voice, and still feels guilty for throwing away birthday cards, even the ones with no message inside. This house wasn't supposed to be a battlefield. It was supposed to be a gift. It had belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor Whitman, a woman who taught me how to prune roses and balance a checkbook in the same afternoon. She left it to me outright when she died. No conditions, no shared ownership, just a clean deed with my name on it. But that day, watching my parents return from their dream vacation on my dime, reaching for a door that would never open for them again, I didn't feel cruel. I felt calm. Because I had finally done the one thing they never expected. I stopped asking to be loved. Why would a daughter do that to her own parents? That's what they'll ask. That's what I used to ask myself. But if you stay with me, I'll tell you what they didn't. And by the end, you might not ask that question anymore. I grew up in a beige rental house with creaky floors and a thermostat no one dared touch. My father, Frank Morgan, worked swing shifts at a local packaging plant. Every night he came home with the same tired line, "I could have made something of myself if I hadn't had a kid so young." He never said it to me directly. He didn't have to. My mother, Susan Morgan, kept track of every dollar like it was owed back to her someday. Even now, I remember the way she'd hand me new school shoes receipts still in the box and say, "Just don't grow out of them too fast this time." They never hit me. They never screamed. But everything I was given came with an invisible invoice. By the time I was old enough to understand what shame felt like, I'd already learned how to apologize for needing things. Food, space, attention. I became good at not asking. And then there was Eleanor Whitman, my grandmother. My mother's mother. Every other weekend, she'd pick me up in her old Buick and drive the 45 minutes to her house out in Westerville. She made grilled cheese with actual butter and let me sleep in the guest room with the floral sheets. She never talked about my parents, but she never asked me to explain them either. In her house, I wasn't too much. I wasn't a handful. I was just Claire. And somewhere between her rose garden and the back steps where we'd sit with lemonade, she planted something else in me, the quiet belief that I was worth more than just what I cost. When I turned 18, she helped me apply for scholarships. When I got accepted into a state university for business, Frank said I was pretending to be better than the rest of us. He didn't know I had 3 jobs lined up to make rent. I didn't ask them for a cent. I never expected them to come to graduation. But Eleanor came. She wore her navy blue coat and pearls, and when she hugged me after the ceremony, she whispered, "You built this yourself, Claire. Don't let anyone take it from you." Back then, I thought she meant my diploma. I didn't know she was talking about so much more. I never asked why my parents acted like love was something to be earned. But maybe the better question is, what happens to a daughter who spends her whole life trying to earn it? Eleanor passed away 3 weeks before my 25th birthday. A sudden heart attack in her kitchen next to the kettle she used to make chamomile tea every night. I didn't cry at the funeral, not because I wasn't grieving, but because I knew if I started I wouldn't stop, and I couldn't fall apart in front of Frank and Susan. They stood like statues the whole time, stiff and unreadable, like they were attending an event, not a loss. Then came the reading of the will. The attorney's voice was calm, too calm. To my granddaughter Claire Morgan, who has shown determination, responsibility, and grace. I leave my home at 1842 Sycamore Lane fully and solely. Frank's jaw clenched. Susan blinked like she'd misheard. The house was worth around $850,000 at the time. And it was mine. Outright. No shared family asset. No co-signing. Just me. My parents received a modest sum in cash. Within weeks, they had a new car and a flat-screen TV. The rest of their share vanished into what Susan called necessities. That's when the language started to shift. It wasn't Claire's house anymore. It was the family home. At first, it was little things. When we redo the kitchen, we should host Thanksgiving this year. Then came design sketches taped to the fridge, Pinterest boards sent to my email. Frank talked about knocking down walls. Susan didn't like the paint I had chosen, said it made the living room feel cold. But I was the one paying the bills. Property tax, insurance, repairs. They didn't offer. They didn't ask. I was still in my 20s, making 6 figures as a realtor, working 12-hour days to keep up. But in their eyes, I was just playing house. A girl with keys to something they still believed should have been theirs. One night, Susan walked into the kitchen, put her hand on the new granite countertops, and said, "Your grandmother always wanted this place to feel like home. For all of us." I nodded, but inside, a quiet question started to grow. If they never had to earn it, why did I always feel like I did? It started at Sunday dinner. Chicken over cooked wine, half-flat conversation stilted as usual when my father dropped it into the silence like it was no big deal. "We're finally going to Europe." I looked up from my plate. "You're serious?" Susan smiled without looking at me. 3 months. London, Rome, Paris, all the places we never got to see. Frank added, "We figure it's now or never." I wanted to be happy for them. I really did. Then came the follow-up. "We can use the equity in the house," Frank said, casually slicing into his chicken. I set my fork down. "You mean my house?" He didn't flinch. "It's the family home, Claire. Your grandmother would have wanted us to enjoy it together." Susan nodded. "Don't be selfish. You've got a good job, no kids, no husband. This house is just sitting here making money." I said no. I said it calmly, directly. But then I softened. I offered to help a little since I knew they couldn't afford it otherwise. They didn't fight me on that. They didn't need to. Before I knew it, I was covering their flights, their hotels, their rail passes. I spent hours researching affordable but comfortable options. And still, Susan complained. "The hotel in Florence is too far from the city center. We would have preferred something with a balcony. Claire, can you just book it all? It's easier that way." The day before they left, I overheard Susan on the phone with her sister. I wasn't eavesdropping, just walking past the living room on my way to the laundry. Her voice was light, even amused. "Of course Claire's paying. It's the least she can do considering we let her keep the house. Let me keep the house." That sentence sat with me longer than I expected. Longer than it should have. Because some part of me, some raw, unhealed part, still wanted to believe they saw me as more than a bank account with feelings. That maybe deep down they still saw me as their daughter. They didn't, but I didn't know that yet. Not until the call. It was a Tuesday in mid-June. Warm outside, but inside the house, something had gone cold. I had just finished showing a mid-century home across town and came back to find the kitchen sink still leaking. The drip had worsened, eating into the cabinet wood. Frank had installed that faucet himself last year. One of the few things he'd bothered to handle. I needed the warranty and I needed it fast, so I called. He answered on the third ring. Yeah. Hey, quick question, do you remember where you put the paperwork for the kitchen faucet? It's leaking again. He sighed. In the den. Second drawer. Under kitchen. Why can't this wait till we're back? Because water is literally pooling under the sink. A beat passed. We're about to head to dinner near the Eiffel Tower. That sounds nice, I said, forcing something like a smile. Enjoy. Yeah. The line clicked but didn't disconnect. I should have ended it there, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe some instinct kept my finger hovering. Some part of me that knew without knowing. Then I heard Susan's voice faint but clear. Who was that? Frank answered, already bored. Claire. Complaining. Again. They laughed. I didn't. Something about the sink, he added, his voice now crisp in the open air. She finds problems with everything. I don't know why your mother ever left her that house. We're her parents. It should have gone to us. We'll deal with it when we're back. That place is our retirement plan, whether she sees it or not. I sat frozen. She's always been a burden, Frank said, and I felt it like the floor dropped out from under me. So easy to guilt her into things, Susan said. Remember how fast she agreed to pay for this trip? I just had to say family a few times. Give it time, Frank added. She'll sign the house over. She wants our approval too badly not to. They laughed again. I started recording. If she resists, Susan said, we start bringing up medical bills, nursing homes. Emotional pressure works better than logic. Worst case, Frank said, we're already living there. Possession is 9/10 of the law. My hand was shaking. When we get back, I want the master bedroom, he said, as if claiming territory. And she's looking at buying a second property? Susan scoffed. She should be helping us, not building her empire. I sat there for 15 minutes listening. By the time the call finally dropped, I wasn't Claire anymore. Not their daughter, not their safety net. I was someone else entirely. Someone who knew the truth and couldn't unknow it. And the worst part. This hadn't started in Paris. It had started years ago. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I stood in the middle of the kitchen staring at the spot on the cabinet where the water had darkened the wood grain and wondered how long it had been rotting beneath the surface. The sink. The house. Me. That night I didn't sleep. I listened to the recording again. Not just the words, but the tone, the practiced laughter, the confidence in my obedience. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a strategy, one they'd been refining for years. The next morning, I called in sick. I told the office I had the flu. I think part of me believed it. My body felt sick, but the infection wasn't viral, it was something older. On the second day, I called Patricia Winters, a real estate attorney I'd worked with in the past. Clear-eyed, blunt, no time for nonsense. I told her everything. The inheritance, the years of quiet pressure, the phone call. The deed is in your name, she asked. Yes. No co-owners. No liens. I've paid all the bills. Alone. Then legally, Claire, they have no claim. You allowed them to live there, but that doesn't entitle them to ownership. What about, because they're my parents? You're not legally required to house your parents, she said without even a pause. Especially not manipulative ones. It felt like someone had unhooked a stone from my chest. Later that afternoon, I sat on the floor of the guest room, my room still, and opened a shoebox of old papers. Letters, mostly. Things my grandmother Helen had written me over the years. I found one I hadn't remembered folded into a greeting card with watercolor violets on the front. It was dated 4 weeks before she died. My dearest Claire, I know this house won't protect you from everything, but it will give you ground to stand on when others try to shake it. Your parents, my son included, have always looked for shortcuts. You never did. That's why the house is yours. Because I trust you to live in it, not just own it. Love, always, Grandma Helen. I didn't know I was crying until the words blurred. I clutched the letter like it could steady me. They had called me a burden, but Helen had seen something else. The rest of the week passed in a sort of sharp quiet. I opened a new bank account, reserved a short-term furnished rental 2 hours away, called a discreet real estate colleague and told him I wanted to sell fast privately, no signs, no open houses. He asked if I was running from something. No, I said, not entirely believing it. I'm just ready to stop pretending this is still a home. That night, I made a spreadsheet of every item in the house: furniture, art, documents. I categorized what was mine, what was my grandmother's, and what was theirs. I didn't keep a single thing in the gray zone. It had taken me years to realize the price of doubt. I wasn't about to pay it again. The house emptied in stages. I boxed up my belongings first, quietly, methodically. The movers came early on a Tuesday. I didn't watch them lift the couch I'd picked out with my first commission bonus. I didn't stand in the garden while they dug up the hydrangeas I'd planted in Helen's honor and transferred them to pots for the new place. I just made sure everything went to the right truck. My parents' belongings, what little they had, went into labeled boxes and plastic tubs, each carefully documented. I rented a storage unit in their name, 6 months paid in advance. The access code was emailed to their hotel in Rome. I left nothing ambiguous. The house sold faster than I expected. Marcus, my colleague, found a corporate buyer relocating from San Diego. He paid cash, didn't haggle, and asked no questions. The closing was set for midweek 3 days before my parents were due to return. It was just enough time. On the final morning, I stood alone in the living room. Everything echoed: my footsteps, my breath, my grandmother's voice in memory. In the kitchen, I placed a single note on the counter where we used to bake holiday cookies. Surprise! A burden did this. Then I left the key on the hook by the door, locked it from the inside, stepped out through the back patio, and walked away. That same afternoon, I turned in my old phone at the carrier store, disconnected my number, and left my email behind. Everything traceable stopped there. For the first time in years, I was unreachable. 3 days later, they came back. I don't know exactly how they reacted when their key didn't fit. But I know what the voicemail said. "Claire, what the hell is going on? We just got here and our stuff is gone. The locks are changed. Call us immediately." The second voicemail an hour later was sharper. More clipped. "This is not funny. You better explain yourself. Now." By the fifth message, my mother had shifted tone, soft, syrupy, the way she always sounded when she needed something. "We're worried about you, sweetie. Please just let us know you're okay." I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the recordings to Patricia. "Let me know if any of this could be used against me," I typed. A few minutes later, her reply came back. "You're fine. They have no legal standing and you've handled this with remarkable restraint. Hold your ground." But it wasn't just legal ground I was holding. It was something quieter, older. Every room in that house had once whispered a version of "you owe them." Now, for the first time, the only voice left in my life was mine. Still, there was one thing I hadn't planned for. They didn't take silence well. The voicemails kept coming, urgent, furious, weepy, cycling like clockwork through every tool they had ever used to pull me back. By day 5, the tone had turned. "You sold our home," my father hissed into the receiver. "You had no right. We're talking to a lawyer." But that word "our" still clung like mold to everything they said. The house had never been theirs. Not on paper. Not in Grandma Helen's will. Not in any version of the truth that mattered. They had convinced themselves of ownership through proximity, not responsibility. And now they were trying to reclaim it the only way they knew how: guilt first, then fear. I didn't listen to every message, just enough to stay ahead. I heard when they tried showing up at my old office. Jamie, my assistant, texted me, "Your parents are here. They're making a scene. Boss just asked them to leave." I called the office line 5 minutes later, ready to do damage control. But Vanessa, my boss, met me with calm. "They accused you of fraud," she said flatly. "Said you stole their home." I held my breath. "They're not welcome here again," she continued. "We flagged them. Take whatever time you need." I swallowed the knot in my throat. Vanessa wasn't just protecting her business, she was protecting me, and I hadn't known how much I needed that until it happened. A week passed, then 2. And then the final card arrived in email. Long, wordy, meant to look composed but seething between the lines. They'd heard from a neighbor that I had moved. They hoped I was in a place to reconsider. They forgave me. But they also expected me to use the sale proceeds to buy a new property, one we can all share together as a family. It was always that word they used, like rope family. Always wielded with conditions never grace. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent the message to Patricia. Her response was even shorter this time. They're testing you. Don't answer. This is their pattern: press retreat, then press harder. She was right, and the old me might have folded, might have taken their moment of forgiveness as a last thread of belonging, but I didn't need their version of family anymore. What I didn't know, what none of us saw coming, was how far they'd go when they realized I meant it, and that they'd return not with lawyers, but with something worse, a plan to show up in person again. Only this time I wouldn't be the one afraid of losing control. The question now wasn't if they'd confront me. It was, what would they do when the only power left to them was a performance? It was Rachel, my former neighbor, who called. Claire, I thought you should know your parents are parked in front of the house, just sitting there, watching. My breath caught. The new owners, they're out of town. Business trip, I think. But your parents? They haven't moved in an hour. I thanked her. My voice was steady, but my palms were damp. That same evening, the message came. Blocked number. A voice I'd known my whole life. We need to talk, tomorrow, 10 a.m., the coffee shop on Walnut. If you don't come, we'll go back to your office. This time we won't be quiet. He didn't wait for my answer. I called Patricia. They're threatening to come to my work. You don't owe them a meeting, she said. You have grounds for a restraining order. I know, I said, but I want to face them. Just once. On my terms. The next morning I arrived 15 minutes late. Deliberately. The Daily Cup was busy as always. I picked it for that reason, public, neutral, familiar. The owner, Greg, had been one of my first clients. I saw them before they saw me. My mother's hair had grayed at the roots. My father's hands clenched around a half-drunk coffee cup. They looked older. Not wiser, just older. I walked over slowly, sat down without greeting, placed my phone on the table between us, screen lit. My mother's eyes flicked toward it. Recording, she asked. Protection, I replied. You're our daughter, Claire, my father snapped. Not an adversary. And yet you threatened my job. They blinked. The mask cracked. Let's get to it, I continued. What do you want? My mother opened her purse, pulled out a printout of the deed transfer. You sold it. Without even telling us. It wasn't your house. We lived there, my father said. We made it a home. You occupied it, I corrected. You replaced my furniture, repainted my walls, and undermined every decision I made in my own space. We were family. No, I said quietly. You were trespassers with keys. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping. I didn't flinch. You think this makes you strong? His voice was low, trembling. You think this is winning? I think this is peace. My mother's eyes shone with tears she hadn't earned. We didn't mean what we said. That phone call you misunderstood. I pressed play. Her own voice echoed from the recording. She's been a burden from the start. I stopped it after 10 seconds. Enough. They were pale now, smaller. You didn't misstep, I said. You revealed yourselves. That's the difference. What now? My mother whispered. What happens to us? You find another daughter, I said, then stood up, walked out. The coffee shop's bell chimed behind me like punctuation. They didn't follow. They wouldn't. And if they did, they'd find that the door no longer opened the way it once had. Not because I changed the locks, but because I changed the person behind them. It's been nearly a year since I sold the house on Sycamore Street. The one with the chipped blue shutters and the garden that bloomed in late April, where my grandmother once taught me the names of things that stayed rooted even in storms. My new life is quieter, not empty, just quieter. I live in a townhouse in a town with no old memories. The furniture is simple, the walls bare by choice. No family photos, no inherited clocks that never kept the right time. Each morning, I make my coffee and sit by the window. Watch the light move across the floor like it belongs there. Work is steady, fulfilling even. I help people, especially women, buy their first homes. I tell them the things no one told me. That ownership isn't just about land or keys. It's about voice, boundaries, dignity. One young woman cried after closing. No one ever believed I could own something she said. I believe it now. I told her. I still see Dr. Palmer once a month. Sometimes we talk about finances, sometimes about silence. You've been unusually still, she said during our last session. Still isn't the same as stuck, I said, and it's true. The weight that once knotted itself around my spine, the need to be accepted by people who only loved me when I was useful, has loosened. Not disappeared, but loosened. There were emails, of course, after that coffee shop meeting, long, erratic paragraphs, accusations laced with sugar. My father claimed I humiliated them. My mother called it an unfortunate misunderstanding that could still be mended. I didn't respond. I owe them nothing, not an explanation, not a window into my new address, not even anger. Only distance, clean, deliberate distance. One afternoon in late spring, I returned to the cemetery. Just me and a folded lawn chair and a paper bag of peonies. "Hi, Gran," I said, settling beside her. The stone was weathered now, but the name beneath it was still clear. "I think I finally understand what you meant in that letter I said aloud. About value, and choosing who gets to define it." I sat there for nearly an hour. No tears this time. Just space. As I stood to leave, I placed one hand lightly on the headstone, a gesture that felt more like grounding than goodbye. Back at home, I opened the last box I had yet to unpack. Inside, an old photograph, me and Gran sitting cross-legged on her porch, both of us grinning faces full of summer. I framed it, set it on my windowsill. It's the only family picture I keep out. Everything else I keep where it belongs, behind me, but not buried, not forgotten, just uncarried. If you've ever had to let go just to stand up, I'm still listening.